Vanessa Carter had dealt with her fair share of entitled men. Wall Street brokers who thought a big tip bought them a piece of her. Celebrities who expected her to giggle at their drunken flirting. But Damian Lancaster was something else entirely. She had seen his type before, the kind of man who walked into a room and expected the world to rearrange itself for him. But as he sat at his private booth in L'Etoile Noire, there was something different in his eyes. He wasn't just looking at her. He was hunting her. "Come here," he had said. His voice had been low, smooth. A command, not a request. Vanessa hesitated only for a second before stepping closer. She had played her role for years, polite, professional, forgettable. But tonight, she needed to know what he wanted. Damian leaned back, tapping a finger against his whiskey glass. His eyes never left hers. "You're not like the others here," he said, his tone casual but laced with something darker. "You carry yourself differently." Vanessa forced a neutral smile. "I just do my job, sir." His lips curled slightly, as if she had told a joke only he understood. "I like a woman who knows her place." There it was. The arrogance. The control. The assumption that he owned the world and everything in it. Vanessa tilted her head. "And where do you think my place is?" Damian took a slow sip of his drink, then set it down deliberately. "With me." For a fraction of a second, silence stretched between them. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small black card. No name. No contact information. Just an address printed in embossed gold lettering. "Come tonight," he said. "I don't like repeating myself." Vanessa stared at the card, then back at him. Her heartbeat stayed steady, her face unreadable. She knew what he was doing. He thought this was a game where he set the rules. But he had just made the worst mistake of his life. She took the card, sliding it into her pocket with a practiced nod. "Enjoy your evening, Mr. Lancaster." As she walked away, her mind was already working. Tonight, she wouldn't just play along. She would start his downfall. The black iron gates of Lancaster Manor loomed in front of Vanessa like the mouth of a beast, waiting to swallow her whole. The address Damian had given her led here, a sprawling estate just outside Manhattan, hidden away from prying eyes. Even from the outside, it reeked of power, control, and untouchability. Her fingers tightened around the card as the intercom buzzed. "State your name." The voice was deep, mechanical, a security protocol. She glanced up at the camera pointing at her. They were already watching. "Vanessa Carter," she said evenly. A pause. Then, a loud metallic click. The gates groaned as they swung open. She stepped forward. No turning back now. The long, winding driveway stretched into the distance, cutting through a perfectly manicured lawn that was too perfect, as if it was never meant to be touched. Each step she took, she felt it more, the weight of entering a world she wasn't supposed to survive. Or so Damian thought. The mansion was a cathedral of excess. Massive, towering columns framed the entrance, the marble steps gleaming under the soft glow of antique lanterns. The doors were 20 feet tall, hand-carved with intricate patterns that looked almost ancient. The moment Vanessa stepped inside, the temperature dropped. The interior was vast, almost unnerving in its emptiness. Soft classical music drifted from somewhere unseen, mixing with the faint scent of aged leather and expensive cologne. She barely had time to take it all in before a voice spoke. Right on time. Damian stood at the top of the staircase, one hand in his pocket, the other swirling a glass of deep amber whiskey. His presence filled the space, commanding it effortlessly. Vanessa exhaled slowly. Showtime. Damian descended the stairs slowly, deliberately. His tailored black suit moved like liquid around his body, every step calculated, controlled. Vanessa had faced killers, traffickers, and warlords before. But Damian Lancaster was different. He didn't need to raise his voice to make people fear him. He owned the room without speaking. "You look nervous," he said smoothly. Vanessa let a small, uncertain smile flicker across her lips. Let him believe that. A little. Damian's eyes darkened with satisfaction. He loved the idea of control, of bending people to his will. He held out a hand. "Let me show you around." She hesitated just long enough to keep him interested before placing her hand in his. His fingers curled around hers. Warm. Firm. unyielding. The deeper they walked into the mansion, the more Vanessa understood this was a fortress. No visible security. No guards standing at the doors. But that didn't mean the place wasn't crawling with hidden cameras, motion sensors, and silent enforcers watching from the shadows. The hallways stretched forever, lined with paintings that looked centuries old. "You have good taste," Vanessa murmured. Damien chuckled. "Do I?" She stopped in front of one particular painting, a stormy sea swallowing a ship whole. Dark. Violent. Inescapable. Damien stepped behind her, so close she could feel his breath against her neck. "Do you like it?" he asked. Vanessa didn't turn. "It feels inevitable." A pause. Then, a soft chuckle. "Smart girl." She had the unsettling feeling he wasn't talking about the painting anymore. They entered a candlelit dining room, where a long black marble table stretched between them like a battlefield. A single chair was pulled out at the end. For her. Vanessa took her seat, keeping her movements controlled, unshaken. Damien poured wine into her glass. She watched the liquid swirl, deep, blood-red. She didn't drink. Damien noticed. "You don't trust me." Vanessa gave him a small smile. "I don't trust anyone." His eyes gleamed. He liked that answer. But she wasn't here to impress him. She was here to bring him down. Halfway through the dinner, Vanessa did something risky. She challenged him. "You built all of this by yourself?" she asked, twirling the stem of her glass between her fingers. Damien exhaled a soft laugh. "No one builds an empire alone. But you're the one in charge." A flicker of something passed over his face, too fast to catch. Vanessa leaned forward slightly. "Unless you answer to someone else." Silence. Then, Damien set his glass down a little too forcefully. For the first time, she saw it, the crack in his confidence. Whoever he worked for, he feared them. A weakness. Vanessa smiled. "Just curious." Damien's gaze stayed locked on her. For the first time that night, he was the one studying her. After dinner, Damien led her to a private lounge. A fire crackled behind him as he leaned back, studying her with the same interest a cat gives a trapped mouse. Then, he pulled something from his pocket. A gun. He set it on the table between them. Vanessa's heart didn't race. She had been trained for this. But she let her fingers tighten slightly, just enough for him to see. Damien smirked. Satisfied. "Do you know how to use one?" he asked lazily. Vanessa met his gaze. "Do you?" He laughed. A deep, rich sound. But his fingers tapped against the barrel, thoughtful. Calculating. He was testing her. And he wasn't done yet. Just as Vanessa thought the night was winding down, Damien leaned in. "Stay." It wasn't a question. Vanessa's stomach twisted, not with fear, but with strategy. Saying no would make her suspicious. Saying yes would make her vulnerable. She exhaled softly. "One drink." Damien's smirk deepened. The game had just changed. But what he didn't know was, Vanessa had already won. The fire crackled behind Damien, its golden glow casting long shadows over his sharp features. Vanessa sat across from him, her body relaxed, but every nerve in her was wired for survival. He studied her over the rim of his whiskey glass, a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. "You don't scare easily," he mused. Vanessa tilted her head. "Should I be scared?" Damien set his drink down slowly. Too slowly. "There are two kinds of people in my world," he murmured. "Those who follow, and those who disappear." A warning. A challenge. Vanessa let a small smile play at her lips. "Sounds lonely." Damien chuckled. "Oh, Vanessa. I don't get lonely." For the first time, his words felt like a lie. And she intended to find out why. Damien shifted, resting his elbows on his knees, leaning in slightly. His presence was overwhelming, designed to make people shrink under its weight. Vanessa didn't move. A flicker of something crossed his face. Approval? Interest? Suspicion? "What do you want?" he asked suddenly. The question hit harder than she expected. He wasn't asking about the job. The wine. The night. He was trying to see through her. Vanessa gave a slow, knowing smile. The same thing you do. Damien's eyebrow lifted. And what's that? She leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice. Making him lean in too. Power. Silence. Then, a smirk. For the first time, Vanessa saw it, a flicker of genuine amusement in his cold, calculating eyes. She had passed some kind of test. But the real one was just beginning. Damien stood and walked to the massive bookshelf lining the far wall. With a single pull, he slid out a hidden panel. Vanessa kept her expression neutral. Curiosity was a weapon. Inside was a black safe. With a quiet click, he unlocked it. Vanessa leaned back, watching as he pulled out a small leather folder. Then, he tossed it onto the table between them. It landed with a soft thud. She glanced down. Her name was on it. Vanessa froze. Stay calm. She flipped the folder open. Inside, a file on her. Too clean. Too generic. Nothing real. But Damien's eyes never left her face. A woman with no past, he murmured. I find that interesting. She met his gaze, her heart pounding. Do I need a pass to serve drinks? A pause. Then, a slow smirk. No, Damien admitted. But you're not here for the drinks. The game had just shifted. Vanessa had spent years perfecting the art of control. But so had he. Damien leaned back, fingers tapping against the arm of his chair. Watching her. So, Vanessa Carter. He said her name like he was trying to unwrap it. What do you think of me? Vanessa smiled. A trap. You enjoy control, she said. You expect people to fear you. Damien raised an eyebrow. Do you? She tilted her head. Would you want me here if I did? A slow laugh rumbled in his chest. Amusement. Interest. Something darker. You're sharp, he said. Vanessa leaned in slightly, mirroring his posture. So are you. His smirk faltered for a fraction of a second. He hadn't expected that. A crack in the mask. Small. But real. Vanessa decided to push further. You said people disappear. She traced the rim of her wine glass with her finger. Who did you lose? For the first time, Damien's expression hardened. Vanessa watched the shift happen in real time. 1 second, he was amused. The next, ice. You assume I've lost someone. Vanessa met his gaze evenly. Haven't you? Silence stretched between them. Damien's fingers tightened around his glass. Then, finally, he let out a quiet laugh. You're playing a dangerous game. Vanessa exhaled softly, leaning back. So are you. The tension in the air was different now. Damien had spent the night testing her. But now, for the first time, he was the one under a microscope. He stood up suddenly, moving toward the window. Avoiding her gaze. Outside, the estate stretched into darkness. Endless. Silent. Trapped. He exhaled. You remind me of someone. Vanessa's pulse quickened. Who? A muscle in his jaw tightened. Someone I trusted. Past tense. Vanessa's mind raced. Who had betrayed him? Who had made him like this? Before she could push further, Damien turned back to her, the mask was back. I should be careful with you, he mused. Vanessa smiled slightly. You should. Vanessa knew the night was ending, but not before Damien sent one last message. As he walked her to the door, he suddenly reached out, his fingers barely brushing her wrist. She stilled. Damien leaned in, his voice low. I know when people are hiding things, Vanessa. A chill ran down her spine. Too close. Too perceptive. She turned slowly, meeting his gaze. And I know when people are lying to themselves. For the first time, Damien had no response. She stepped outside. The heavy doors shut behind her. But as she walked down the long driveway, she couldn't shake the feeling that Damien Lancaster was still watching. And he wasn't done with her yet. Vanessa's car cut through the night as she left Lancaster Manor, but her mind never left the mansion behind her. Every word, every glance, every moment Damien had let his mask slip, it all played in her head like a movie. He knew something. Not enough to expose her, not yet. But the way his voice had dropped, the way his fingers had barely grazed her wrist before she left. It was a warning. She was getting too close. Good. That meant it was time to strike. Vanessa pulled into a quiet parking garage in downtown Manhattan, parking in a shadowed corner. She reached into the console and retrieved her phone. Mobile phone with arrow Vanessa to FBI. I have something. A response came almost instantly. Mobile phone with arrow FBI handler. How big? Vanessa exhaled. Big enough that I might not walk away from this. She typed 3 words. Mobile phone with arrow, he's cracking. Now, she just had to make sure she was the one still standing when the cracks shattered completely. The next evening, Vanessa walked back into the Lion's Den. Lancaster Tower. Damien's empire stood 40 stories above New York, a beacon of wealth, power, and everything Vanessa had vowed to burn to the ground. The moment she stepped into the glass elevator, she felt it. Cameras. Security. Eyes everywhere. As the elevator rose, so did her pulse. Tonight, she wasn't just observing. She was taking action. The doors opened to Damien's private floor, and the first thing Vanessa saw was a man waiting for her. Not Damien. Someone bigger. Dante Russo. Damien's right-hand man. His fixer. The kind of guy who made problems disappear. Vanessa barely had time to mask her reaction before he stepped forward. Mr. Lancaster is expecting you, he said, voice like steel wrapped in silk. She smiled. Then let's not keep him waiting. Inside, Damien was already watching. Damien sat in a leather chair, looking every bit the king surveying his kingdom. Vanessa, he said smoothly. Back so soon? She walked to the bar and poured herself a drink. No hesitation. No weakness. Figured I'd see if you actually meant it when you said you like people who challenge you. Damien chuckled, swirling his whiskey. That depends. Vanessa met his gaze. On what? On whether you survive the challenge. The words sent a chill down her spine. He was pushing her. Testing her. Good. She was testing him too. An hour later, Damien was leading her through a different part of the tower. Vanessa knew exactly what she was looking for. Somewhere in this building, hidden behind luxury and arrogance, were files. Evidence. The truth that would bring him down. Damien stopped at a door, scanning his fingerprint. The lock clicked open. Vanessa's stomach tightened. He led her inside, into a room full of screens. Security feeds. Vanessa's own face stared back at her from multiple angles. Impressive, isn't it? Damien mused. How easy it is to watch people. Her pulse pounded. He was showing her this for a reason. Did he already know? Vanessa forced herself to look at the screens, pretending curiosity instead of alarm. This is intense, she said, nodding at the setup. You like control that much? Damien sipped his drink. It's not about control, Vanessa. He turned to her, eyes darker now. Sharper. It's about knowing who you can trust. Vanessa let out a soft laugh. And? Do you trust me? Damien studied her for too long. Not yet. That wasn't a no. That was a challenge. Later, Vanessa excused herself from the lounge and slipped down a hallway. She had 10 minutes, maybe less. Her objective was clear, find the real secrets. A hidden office. A safe. Something. She moved fast, scanning doors. Locked. Locked. Unlocked. Bingo! She slipped inside. The room was minimalistic, but behind the desk, a fingerprint scanner. Her heart pounded. This was it. She pulled out a small, FBI-issued heat sensor and pressed it to the scanner. A fingerprint appeared, Damien's. She took out a molded copy. Pressed it against the scanner. The safe clicked open. She didn't have time to feel victorious. Because at that exact moment, the lights went out. And a voice, smooth as death, whispered in the darkness. Looking for something? Vanessa's breath hitched. Damien was behind her. She turned slowly, keeping her expression neutral. But the room was too quiet. Not just Damien. Others were there too. Shit. Damien stepped closer, his presence a shadow swallowing the room. You're an interesting one, Vanessa, he murmured. She gave a small smirk. So are you. His gaze flickered to the open safe. Then back to her. Vanessa braced for impact. Then, Damien smiled. But it wasn't amusement. It was confirmation. You're not who you say you are. Vanessa kept her breathing steady. She had been made. But not completely. Damien still didn't know what she was after. Who do you think I am? She asked, voice smooth. Damien took another step forward. That's what I intend to find out. Then, he did something unexpected. He offered his hand. Let's stop pretending, Vanessa. His voice was low, lethal, intoxicating. Work for me. Vanessa's heart slammed against her ribs. This was new. Unplanned. But it wasn't a gift. It was a trap. One she had no choice but to walk into. The words still hung in the air like a blade suspended above Vanessa's throat. Work for me. Damien Lancaster didn't make offers. He made ultimatums. Vanessa kept her face carefully unreadable. She couldn't react too quickly, he was watching her. Studying her. Her mind raced. He didn't know everything. If he did, she wouldn't be standing here. He suspected, but he didn't have proof. Yet. Which meant she still had a way out. She let out a breathy laugh, tilting her head just slightly. Is this a promotion? Damien smirked. It's an opportunity. He took a slow step forward, his presence overpowering in the dimly lit office. Most people don't get second chances with me, Vanessa, he said smoothly. But you. I like you. Her pulse thrummed against her ribs. She was walking a nice edge. If she said no, she was dead. If she said yes, she was deeper in his world than she ever intended to go. There was only one choice to make. She smiled. Then let's stop wasting time. The tension in the room shifted immediately. Damien's smirk deepened, he thought he had won. Vanessa let him believe that. But inside, her instincts were screaming. She wasn't just infiltrating his empire anymore. She was being invited into it. Damien reached for a small black keycard on his desk and placed it in her hand. Congratulations, he murmured. You just became a very valuable asset. Vanessa curled her fingers around the keycard. Her first real access point. But she also knew what it meant. Damien wasn't giving her power. He was putting her in a cage. By the time she left his office, two things became crystal clear. She was no longer just an outsider watching him. Now, everyone in his world would be watching her. Damien had no intention of letting her walk away from this alive unless she proved herself. She needed to move. Fast. The hallway outside was eerily empty. But she felt it. The weight of unseen eyes. As she walked toward the elevator, a voice cut through the silence. You're either very smart or very stupid. Vanessa didn't flinch. She turned to find Dante Russo leaning against the wall, arms crossed. Damien's enforcer. His right hand. His watchdog. His executioner. Vanessa gave him a neutral look. I like to keep things interesting. Dante let out a slow chuckle. Then you're in the right place. But there was something behind his eyes. A warning. People who get too close to Damien. He tilted his head. They don't last long. Vanessa smiled. Then I guess we'll see how long I last. And with that, she stepped into the elevator, letting the doors slide shut between them. Vanessa barely had a second to breathe before she felt it. Something was off. She reached into her coat pocket, fingers brushing over the small tracking scanner she carried. A single red light flashed. Her pulse spiked. Damien had bugged her. Of course he had. Her movements remained smooth, effortless, but her mind was already working. How long had he been listening? Watching? Tracking? It didn't matter. She had to stay ahead. And that meant making her next move tonight. Vanessa drove straight to her safe house, an unassuming loft in Brooklyn. She moved fast, disabling the tracker as soon as she stepped inside. Her hands flew over her laptop. She needed to access Damien's internal files before he realized she was already playing him. But the second she started running a trace, her screen glitched. Then, a message appeared. Mobile phone with arrow, nice try, Vanessa. Her breath caught. Then, before she could react, another message popped up. Mobile phone with arrow, you move fast. I like that. Her stomach dropped. Damien knew. And worse? He was toying with her. Vanessa shut her laptop. The walls were closing in. She had underestimated him. He wasn't just watching her movements. He had been expecting her to betray him. Her phone vibrated. Mobile phone with arrow, incoming call, Damien Lancaster. For a single second, she considered not answering. Then she did. She kept her voice calm. Smooth. Enjoying yourself? Damien's chuckle was low and rich. Immensely. Vanessa leaned against the counter. So, what now? Are you going to kill me? A pause. Then, not yet. Her grip tightened. Damien's voice was calm. Controlled. You and I both know the rules, Vanessa. His tone darkened. You're playing a dangerous game. But I have to admit, I don't want it to end just yet. Her heartbeat hammered. Because for the first time, Damien Lancaster sounded entertained. And that was more dangerous than anything else. The call ended. Vanessa stood in the silence of her loft, her mind racing. She was running out of time. Damien wasn't just suspicious anymore. He was interested. And that made him twice as deadly. Her phone buzzed again. A new message. Mobile phone with arrow, unknown number. Get out. Now. Her stomach twisted. Who the hell was warning her? Then, a sound. A creak outside her door. Vanessa froze. She reached for her gun just as the lights went out. Darkness swallowed the room. Vanessa's heart pounded as she pressed against the wall, weapon raised. She wasn't alone. A shadow moved. Then, a voice. You should have left when you had the chance. Vanessa fired. Glass shattered. She lunged, grabbing her go bag, kicking out the emergency exit window. The second she hit the ground, she ran. Because whoever had been in her apartment, they weren't there to scare her. They were there to silence her. Vanessa ran. Cold air burned her lungs as she sprinted through the narrow Brooklyn alleyways. Behind her, footsteps. Fast. Heavy. Relentless. She didn't know who they were, Damien's men, an unknown enemy, or someone even worse. She reached the end of the alley and darted into the street, nearly colliding with a yellow cab. The driver honked, cursed. She barely heard it. Too focused. Too wired. Her apartment was burned. She had nowhere to hide. Her only option? Go deeper. Vanessa yanked open the cab door and slid in, breathless. Where to? The driver asked. She didn't hesitate. Downtown. Lancaster Tower. If they were coming for her, she was taking the fight to them. The streets of Manhattan blurred past, neon signs and skyscrapers melting into a haze of adrenaline. Vanessa gripped the keycard Damien had given her. The only thing that could get her past his security. Was she making a mistake? Probably. But she wasn't waiting to be hunted. She was becoming the hunter. The cab pulled up to Lancaster Tower. Vanessa stepped out, her heart pounding. The entrance was quiet, empty, too empty. She knew she was expected. She swiped the keycard. The doors slid open. She walked inside. Straight into the darkness. The elevator ride up was silent. Too silent. Vanessa tapped the button for the top floor. Damien's domain. Her hands were steady. But her pulse was not. She wasn't sure what was waiting for her when those doors opened. A team of guards? Dante Russo, ready to put a bullet in her head? Or Damien himself, smiling like he already knew she would come? The doors dinged. Vanessa stepped forward. The office was dimly lit, the glow from the city skyline spilling in through the glass windows. And there, standing by the bar, was Damien. Alone. Waiting. "You should have run, Vanessa," he murmured. She smiled. "And miss all the fun?" Damien poured 2 drinks, setting one in front of her. She didn't touch it. He smirked. "Still don't trust me?" Vanessa sat across from him, watching. Calculating. "You're not the one I don't trust," she said. Damien raised an eyebrow. "Then who?" She leaned forward. "Whoever's trying to kill me." Something flashed in his expression. Not surprise. Recognition. She had expected him to deny it, to say it wasn't his people. Instead, he just nodded. "Then we have a problem, don't we?" Vanessa's blood ran cold. He knew. He knew who had come for her. And worse, he wasn't stopping them. Vanessa exhaled, slow and controlled. She couldn't show weakness. If Damien knew she was scared, he'd use it. "You let them come after me." Her voice was calm, even. Damien took a sip of whiskey. "I didn't send them." "But you didn't stop them." His smirk was almost lazy. "Why would I?" Vanessa's fingers twitched. She wanted to lunge, to knock the glass out of his hand, to make him tell her what he knew. But that's what he wanted. He was baiting her. So she smirked back. "Because, Damien," she said smoothly, "if they kill me before you figure out what I know, you'll never get your answers." For the first time, his smile faded. And just like that, the power shifted. Vanessa knew she had him. Damien didn't like not knowing. She had become his obsession. That was her leverage. "Who are they?" she pressed. Damien exhaled, setting down his glass. "You're asking the wrong question." Vanessa frowned. "What's the right one?" His eyes darkened. "Who sent them?" A chill ran through her. Damien wasn't afraid of them. That meant whoever was behind this was bigger than him. She had spent so much time trying to bring him down. She had never stopped to think. What if he wasn't at the top of the food chain? Damien stood and walked to his desk, pulling out a single piece of paper. He slid it across the table. Vanessa picked it up. And froze. The names written on the paper, they weren't just criminals. They were powerful men. Untouchable men. Men who weren't supposed to exist on paper. She looked up at him. "You were never the king, were you?" Damien smirked. "No, Vanessa. I was the knight. And knights could be sacrificed." Vanessa put the paper down carefully. She knew what this was. Damien wasn't giving her this information for free. He was offering something. Or worse, asking for something. "You want me to help you take them down," she said. Damien leaned back. "You're FBI, aren't you?" She didn't react. But his smirk widened. "You thought you were investigating me," he said softly. "But you were never looking high enough." Vanessa's mind raced. Could she trust him? No. But she might need him. The real war wasn't between her and Damien. It was between them and something much bigger. And that meant, for now, just for now, they were on the same side. Vanessa didn't have time to process. The second Damien slid that paper across the table, her fate changed. The names on it weren't just powerful. They were untouchable. She was supposed to bring down Damien Lancaster. Now she was looking at a list of men who owned people like him. Damien smirked. He had one. "Still want to arrest me, Agent Carter?" Vanessa's pulse thundered. He knew. The game was over. But then Damien leaned in, voice dangerously low. "You have 2 choices, Vanessa." His eyes gleamed. "Burn me. Or burn them." She exhaled. A slow, quiet acceptance. She had made her choice. Burn them all. She moved fast. Damien had access. Vanessa had the FBI's muscle. Together, they set the trap. Within hours, the list was in the hands of the right people. Secret indictments. Back-channel deals. High-ranking agents moving in the shadows. Damien had expected a long war. But Vanessa had one advantage he didn't. She wasn't trying to win. She was trying to end it. And she did. With one phone call. The news hit like a wrecking ball. Breaking: international money laundering ring exposed. Congressmen, business tycoons, and judges implicated. Multiple arrests underway, more to come. The real power behind Damien? Gone. The men who had controlled him? Erased. Vanessa watched the headlines roll in. One by one, they fell. Damien stood beside her, silent. "You're free now," she murmured. He chuckled, dark and knowing. "No, Vanessa," he said. "I'm just dangerous in a different way." She turned to him. Studying. Calculating. The war was over. But a new one was beginning. And she wasn't sure if she had just created a bigger monster. The world had changed. Vanessa had burned an empire to the ground. But there was one loose end. Damien Lancaster. They stood on the rooftop of Lancaster Tower, the city sprawling beneath them. "Now what?" he asked, watching her carefully. Vanessa pulled out a final envelope. "Now," she said, "I make sure you don't become the next king." She handed him his own indictment. Damien laughed. And then he jumped. Vanessa ran to the edge. Damien wasn't dead. A helicopter hovered below, catching him in the night. He looked up at her, smirking as the wind whipped around him. "See you soon, Agent Carter." The chopper vanished into the darkness. Vanessa stood there, heart pounding. She hadn't ended him. She had released him. And now, Damien Lancaster wasn't just a criminal. He was a ghost. Free. Untraceable. And one day, he would come back. But so would she.